Hello! 10 years ago, some of you may remember that I made a video series reminiscing on the first 6 generations of Pokemon to celebrate the series' 20th anniversary and the upcoming release of Pokemon Sun and Moon. I was about to say Sword and Shield, Jesus Christ, that game never leaves my mind. While I am proud of these videos, very proud in fact, they are, in general, not that great. My mic, the editing quality, they were all rather poor and I couldn't even supply my own footage at the time. There's a lot of stuff I omitted or even got just straight up wrong. Which is why today we'll be starting all over again. That's right. However, things this time around will be slightly different. Remakes will not be covered in this video, instead they will have their own video, a sort of big compilation video talking about all the remakes. The reason for this is because, well, my coverage of them last time was quite brief and I feel like I did them a little bit dirty. The stark difference in quality between each remake is also worth comparing. Whereas before I stuck to playing the definitive edition of each generation, this time around I will be playing both the initial release and the upper release of each game. At the start of each video I'll make it clear which two of the initial versions I'm playing, so in this video it's going to be Pokémon Red. Many of us take for granted that games like Crystal, Emerald and Platinum are the superior games, and while I don't doubt that, I want to see to what extent. It also gives me a chance to have some relatively fresh experiences, as a lot of these older versions I haven't played in years. Hell, some of them I don't even think I've beaten. Lastly, this video series will not be a marathon like last time, they will simply release as and when they're ready. Also, in case you're following the channel and you're worried about the modern Pokemon games, don't be. They won't be held up for this video series. This is purely a separate project, one I've wanted to do for a very long time now. Legends Arceus is being worked on as we speak. There's been a lot of setbacks behind the scenes. Rest assured I am still hard at work on that video, provided that my PC doesn't get wiped again. Everything's fine. Everything's going fine. Why would you? It's fine. I'm going all out this time. No stone unturned, and I hope you're excited because I know I am. Let's talk about a cornerstone of mine and many others' childhoods. Let's talk Pokemon. So to start, let's talk about Game Freak. You may know Game Freak as that quirky little indie studio known for making technological masterpieces. However, this wasn't always the case. No, in fact, Game Freak actually started out as the name of a video game strategy publication written by Satoshi Tajiri and Ken Sugimori, the creator of the Pokemon series and the artist respectively. They would eventually transition into game development, mainly making puzzle games for the Nintendo. However, they always yearned for something bigger. Satoshi Tajiri in particular was interested in the Game Boy's link cable technology. As a child, he loved exploring the outdoors, catching bugs and other insects, and sharing his discoveries with his friends. However, thanks to Japan's urban redevelopments, he felt that many children were deprived of this experience. Combined with his love of gachapon toys, mysterious toy capsules popular around Japan, he would eventually pitch the game Capsule Monsters, renamed Pocket Monsters or Pokemon, to Nintendo. The board at Nintendo thought that the idea had promise, however was too ambitious for a Game Boy game. It wasn't until the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto went back and convinced the board to give the game a serious shot. I'm sorry, can I just stop there? This guy literally pitched the most profitable piece of entertainment in the world, and it almost didn't happen. Makes you wonder just how many times this has happened and we haven't been as lucky. If anybody tries to tell you that these executives know business, they literally don't. Like, fucking hell. This would result in a pair of games, Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green, with 150 Pokémon in the game, some split between either version, forcing people to come together, share tips, train unattainable Pokémon, and create genuine bonds of friendship. The idea of trading actually originated from the game Dragon Quest II. Tajiri was playing the game on the hunt for a rare item, but he couldn't get it to spawn. Ken Sugimori was playing the game at the same time and managed to get the item in no time at all. 2 of them in fact. Tajiri lamenting how convenient it would be if he could just give him the other copy. Some of you may be a bit confused. Green? I don't remember a green. Pokemon launched in Japan 2 years prior to the rest of the world and Pokemania. These games featured various glitches and lower quality sprites, as well as an assortment of other minor things. Some of these issues, and I do mean some of them, would be addressed in what's called the upper version. For Japan, this was Pokémon Blue, which would then act as the basis for our Red and Blue. So, in essence, we were essentially playing the Platinum of Gen 1 the entire time. Now, I know what I said at the beginning, but I am not playing Pokémon Green for this video. I'm confident enough in my Japanese language skills to get through it, however, since it's something that most of the world doesn't have access to, I don't really think it's relevant to cover in this video. There's that, and I just don't want to play the same game 3 times in a row. If you are interested in this version, however, there is a fan translation out and about. The extent of how much I'm going to cover in this video basically boils down to making fun of the sprites. We begin the game being approached by Professor Oak, who gives us a brief introduction on Pokemon, and how he spent so much of his time researching them, he's literally forgot what his own grandson is called. Now, as you know, for any good Gen 1 playthrough, you need to call your rival some kind of slur or expletive. However, because this is a family-friendly Christian channel, we can't do that, so I censored it. I'll let your imagination fill in the gaps, that way I can't get in trouble. We get up from playing video games, grab a free potion and try and touch grass before an old man comes along and rightfully tells us that it's dangerous and to go back inside. Professor Oak allows us to pick one of 3 Pokemon. Each Pokemon can have up to 2 of 15 different types. As of this game, there are normal, fire, water, grass, electric, ground, rock, poison, flying, fighting, ice, bug, ghost, flying and dragon. Fuck, I already said fly and psychic. Each of them coming with their own weaknesses and resistances. Grass gets burned by fire, fire is burned by water. No, fire is not burned by what you fucking. Fire is put out by water, and water is absorbed by grass. Your rival will always pick the Pokemon you're weak against, so you'll want to go about acquiring a Pokemon to cover those weaknesses. Your starter acting as the bedrock for your entire team. For this first battle though, it's literally just a war of attrition. Now, generally speaking, I don't use items in battle, however, this dickhead got a crit on me, and I wasn't about to walk away from a free level up, and even then I barely made it through. Think that's bad? Oh, it gets worse. Pokemon can learn up to 4 moves. They can even learn moves that aren't of their type. A Pokemon like Nidoking, for example, is incredibly valuable since not only does it have great offensive stats, but it has a whole arsenal of moves it can use. Earthquake, Ice Beam and Fire Blast, just to name a few. If a Pokemon uses a move it corresponds with, then it will gain a same type attack bonus, or stab, calculating up to 1.5 times the damage. Balancing coverage with efficiency is very important. Additionally, there are also moves like Swords Dance or Double Team that provide a Pokemon with a boost to a given stat, provided they aren't KO'd or switched out. Yes, unlike other RPGs, stat gains are permanent. Finally, there are moves like Thunder Wave or Toxic, which gives your opponent a status ailment. Statuses like Paralysis, for example, not only have the chance to make the Pokemon immobile, but also cuts their speed in half, whereas Burn will deal damage each turn while also cutting the physical attack stat in half. Stats are divided into attack, defense, speed and special. Special encompasses both special offense and special defense. Types like fire, water and psychic, for example, are special, whereas normal, ghost and flying are physical. Your ultimate goal here is to journey across the Kanto region, challenge the 8 gym leaders, get their badges and become king of the Pokemon League. And maybe if you get time, stop the local terrorist organisation. Now, while I would love to tell you that there is absolutely no bad starter option here, no, there absolutely is, and it's Charmander. If you looked at this box art and thought, wow, I really want that fire-breathing dragon, then congratulations, you have failed natural selection. Charmander in Gen 1 is, without exaggeration, the absolute worst starter Pokemon in the whole franchise, and I mean that wholeheartedly. Look, at least Chikorita got Razor Leaf and Light Screen. Oh, I'm gonna burn down the competition with my fire-breathing dragon. No you're not. The problem with Charizard is that he doesn't really get any good moves besides Slash, which is a guaranteed crit. Up until level 47, the only thing you'll be using is Ember. Yes, I'm not joking. Charizard, the fire-breathing dragon, does not load Flamethrower until level 47. That's like fucking retirement age. Oh, Jack, just use the Flamethrower TM. I would, if there was one. The only way to get Flamethrower early for Charizard is to transfer him to Gen 2 and give him a move tutor, or hold off on evolution. By pressing the B button when a Pokemon evolves, you can prolong their evolution. In this case, Charmander evolves into Charmeleon at level 16 and Charizard at level 36. When a Pokemon evolves, its stats across the board get a boost. However, should you choose to delay a Pokemon's evolution, it will learn moves earlier than intended. So instead of learning Flamethrower at level 46, Charmander will instead learn at level 37, which is still fucking terrible. Let's just say, hypothetically, you still really want this badass fire dragon. The first two gyms are rock and water. At what point do you say to yourself it's just not worth it? The only gym that Charizard actually does well in is Erica and Koga, which isn't really something to be proud about. That's like winning an arm wrestle against a 2-year-old. They're practically a participation prize. This isn't a problem exclusive to Charizard, mind you, this goes for all Gen 1 fire types, which is really a shame because they're some of my favourites in this generation. Blastoise is the reasonable pick. It's got good offense and solid bulk. It is a standard reliable water type. One of the issues that water starters often face is that they have a lot of competition. In the case of Gen 1, the biggest outliers are Starmie and Slowbro. One being a Swiss Army knife in terms of coverage, and the other one being a bulky powerhouse. Paired with the downright disgusting amnesia ability, Slowbro is terrifying. Blastoise is not a bad option per se, it's just nothing really all that special. It doesn't really have any sort of defined role. Last is Bulbasaur, and my personal favourite of the bunch by a wide margin. Even before we get into its battle prowess, Bulbasaur has a ton of advantages. He's strong against the first two gyms and resistant to the following two, making it an excellent anchor for your team. It also evolves into its final stage at level 32 as opposed to 36. The real kicker is its utility. It does struggle a bit with dungeons since Vine Whip only has 10 PP. However, once it learns Razor Leaf in its mid-20s, it's off to the races. What you have scored here is one of the most powerful Pokemon in the entire game. Razor Leaf is a 55 power move with a high chance of critical hits. How high? 10, 20, 30%? Try 100. Yes, in Generation 1, certain combination of moves and Pokemon will result in a guaranteed critical hit, since whether a move is critical is tied to a Pokemon's speed stat. Examples include Venusaur with Razor Leaf or Slash with Persian. Top that off with Leech Seed and Toxic to slowly drain the life out of your opponents. This Pokemon is one of the best starter Pokemon of all time. I love the Venusaur line. After battling your rival, you pick up Professor Oak's Amazon delivery, to which he then rewards you by giving you more work. The Pokédex is a database for Pokemon, marking which ones you've seen, their habitats, as well as brief descriptions of the Pokemon in question. What's extra cool about the Pokédex is that it actually has different entries for each version. I love the Pokédex, it's something I've really grown to appreciate as I've got older, because as a kid I used to think reading was dumb. I just love how many creative ways Game Freak finds to traumatise children. Actually, while we're on the subject, I've got a bit of a bone to pick with Professor Oak here. Professor Oak is a complete and utter fraud. Yes, this is now an exposed video. This man claims he spent his entire life researching Pokemon, but I know for a fact that that's fucking bullshit. Now, we're doing this Pokédex for his benefit, not for ours. So, how much did he get done? Not a single fucking page. This guy is a lazy fuck, and I know this because he has 3 Pokemon sitting right there. Another thing, how the hell did it take anyone, let alone this guy, to figure out that there was more than 150 Pokemon? Johto is literally walking distance away. That's like North America not knowing that there's a South America. So, exiting Pallet, we make our way west of Viridian City to immediately run into the thing I'm looking for, only to then realise, like an absolute retard, that Generation 1 doesn't give you any balls. Catching a Pokemon is simple. You can simply chuck the ball and hope for the best. Nah, see, the most effective method is to beat it within an inch of its life and or give it the Asan Piker treatment. You can hold up to 6 Pokemon at a time, and newly obtained ones go directly to the PC in the Pokemon Center. This game's version of INS, and luckily they're all taxpayer funded. Be sure you make sure to switch boxes when it's filled, because if you don't, you lose any excess Pokemon you capture. While getting an Nidoran, I also got harassed by a random Spearow that I had no choice but to catch. You think that's bad? What followed was potentially one of the most embarrassing Pokemon battles I've ever partaken in.
shit.
I don't like sand.
Oh, and that's a bad mess.
Well, that was fucking dreadful.
Modern Pokemon is too easy. The most lukewarm take ever. These games just aren't made like they used to be. However, if your only experience with Pokemon ends in Kanto, sit the fuck back down. I was shocked to see how downright brain dead these games can be at times. To the point where I'd argue that the only games easier than this are X and Y and Sword and Shield, and even then, you could make an argument that Red and Blue are easier than them. Unlike those games, whose issues largely stem from the busted EXP distribution, Generation 1 is a cluster of problems that's about as balanced as an elderly person falling down the stairs. To start, the power distribution here is insane. Having a Pokemon being able to guarantee crits is already broken enough, but that isn't even the start of it. As early as Mount Moon, you can get your hands on some serious firepower. Case in point, Nidoking. Evolving from a Nidoran as early as level 16, Nidorino evolves via a Moonstone. Ordinarily, these games would place these further into the adventure to reward exploration and to keep the game balanced. You can find one in Mount Moon directly on the beaten path, securing yourself a fully evolved 505 base stat Pokemon before even reaching Misty. In Celadon City, you'll come across a level 25 Eevee that can evolve into two different forms and Flareon. You can do this via elemental stones, which can be bought directly in the department store. I evolved mine into a Jolteon. Combined with the Thunderbolt TM you get from Lieutenant Surge, I was essentially handed one of the best special attackers in the entire game right out of the box. Then you have the bulky normal type Snorlax, which comes at you at level 30, making it very easy to slot into your team. I mean, you're required to fight it anyway, so you might as well catch it. It's got amnesia to skyrocket its special, and it's also got great physical offense too. However, none of these compare to Alakazam. Alakazam's base form Abra can be found just north of Cerulean City. The problem is that it can only use teleport, and at this point in the game you only have access to Pokeballs. Each Pokemon has a different catch rate, so by doing some advanced mathematics, and by that I mean asking Gemini, the percentage chance for a successful capture according to Google is around 28%. I got mine on the first try, and then proceeded to catch another one immediately after. There is a bit of a hurdle when it comes to Abra. As I said, it only knows teleport, which yes makes it a pain in the arse to catch, but it also makes it a pain to train too. You need to be constantly switching Pokemon throughout the entire fight, and if you're like me and prefer to play on set mode, you don't get the option to switch upon each KO. However, should you reach level 16 and evolve it into Kadabra, congratulations, you've won the game. Provided that you have a friend, which to some of you I bet is harder than the game itself. To evolve Kadabra into Alakazam, you simply need to trade in with another player. Weighing in at a 500 base stat total, 135 of which being special and another 125 being speed, at the low level of 16, Alakazam can beat your opponent harder and more efficiently than a child of a 1950s household. Obviously that special stat means he has superb offense, but it also means he can take as good as he gives. Just hit it with a super effective move, you may cry. Oh you poor sweet innocent child. Psychic types are supposed to be weak to Bug and Ghost. Because of a programming error, Ghost type moves literally have no effect on Psychic types. And even if they did, the only Ghost type move that doesn't do fixed damage is Lick, with the only Ghost type family being Gengar. Now you might be thinking, Jack, wasn't our version supposed to be the improved version? Yes. And in case you're asking about Bug types, come on. The only ones that I can see being even remotely viable are Scyther and Pinsir, the only Bug type move being Twin Needle, which if you think that's bad, it's even worse because it's only learned by Beedrill. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Psychic types effectively have no weaknesses. Remember, you can do this before you even face Misty, the second badge. I think compounding the issue is that Gen 1's roster really isn't that large. 150 may sound like a lot, but it isn't when you consider evolutions and the bad ones, and there are a lot of bad ones. Because Gen 1 is mechanically very simplistic, the viability of a Pokemon basically boils down to how big its stats are and what moves it can learn naturally. For example, while a Pokemon like Jolteon is the overall better battler, Raichu can learn Thunderbolt as part of its natural moveset, letting me use that TM for another Pokemon, whereas I have no incentive to use a Pokemon like Electrode because it's weaker overall and still needs that TM investment. I mean, I could always use Explosion, but at that point I'm basically limiting myself to a 5-man team, and Kamikaze isn't exactly an effective training method. Then you have other unfortunate cases like Magneton or Golbat, Pokemon that would be good if they were in any other generation. They don't have their typing or their evolutions yet, so they don't really stand out as much as they should. And then you have very unfortunate examples like Flareon, who would be pretty decent if somebody on the dev team did decide to be funny and cuck him by giving him a physical attack stat on the special type. The vast majority of the time, the scales of power are tipped in your favour, however this goes both ways. What sucks is that as far as gift Pokemon goes, Eevee is more or less an outlier in terms of usability. You also get a Lapras when clearing the Silph building, a great water type with natural access to Ice Beam, however it's found at a relatively low level. Tragically, the fossil Pokemon you can restore at the Cinnabar Islands are also stuck at level 5, meaning that even if you gun straight there after Koga, they have a very hard time catching up to the rest of your team. A massive shame if you ask me, because these are some of my favourite designs in the whole generation, but I rarely get a chance to use any of them. What this all means is that at the end of every playthrough, you're likely going to be seeing near identical teams. Starter, Evolution, Alakazam or Alakazam at home, Snorlax. But that is, of course, if you know what you're doing. One of the greatest things about Pokemon games is taking the knowledge you learned on a first playthrough and applying it to your next. Sure, I may know that you can use a Moonstone on Nidorino, but who's to say that you won't accidentally use that stone the first time around on a Clefairy? Well, you won't because you watched this video, but other people might. That is one thing I will compliment the newer games for, and I know this might seem a bit contradictory given how much I bitched about it in Sword and Shield, but for how trial and error heavy they are, I don't think Generation 1 is all that accommodating. Say for example you spend your time raising a Goldeen. You saw what happened with Magikarp and you're expecting another Gyarados example, and then you end up getting Seaking. Now, you could pivot to something else, but your options for training are very limited. You have a choice between fighting wild Pokemon, which takes a long time, or using one of your very limited trainer battles, which gives you extra EXP. Generation 2 onwards at least gave you more options in terms of getting more EXP, either through phone calls, Versus Seeker or daily events. Here, if you stake your bet on the wrong one, you're shit out of luck. While I have my gripes with the way that shared EXP is implemented in these games, I can appreciate that it makes committing to party members much less stressful, especially on a first playthrough. It's one of the only hallmarks of old school RPG design because otherwise Red and Blue are remarkably paced games. Sure, there's definitely some problems I could pick at. Continuous attacks like Wrap, for example, halt the pace of any battle since you can't move when they're being used. Freeze is permanent unless you're hit with a fire attack. You can't use a move the time you wake up from sleep. All of that's annoying as hell, but otherwise, it's fairly smooth sailing. Battles are otherwise no nonsense and are over as quick as they start. Hate Kanto all you want, but there's a reason why it's been milked dry. The region itself is a delight to traverse. Because this is a Game Boy game, routes and towns are more densely packed together, making them easier to navigate and progression at a constant. In the time it takes me to get but a single gym badge in one of these more recent games, I already have half of them in this one. Honestly, you don't know how liberating it feels to boot up an RPG and just go. I love RPGs. I really love RPGs. They are my favourite video game genre and have gifted me with some of the most heartfelt, compelling stories I've ever experienced. But sometimes you just want to get into the thick of it. No dialogue, no long-winded tutorials, no web of different plot threads to catch up with. Just grab one of the old man's balls and fuck off. There is really no plot to speak of here. You stop a terrorist organisation at one point, but that's more or less a footnote in your conquest. One of the closest things this game has to a climactic event is having the boss of Team Rocket, Giovanni, turn out to be the final gym leader. How he hasn't been removed from his position yet, I do not know. There's also the Elite Four, ending in one last fight against the newly crowned champion. your rival. And this may all seem like a criticism, but it's not. I'm completely cool with Pokemon having next to no story. Pokemon isn't incapable of telling a good story, 30% of the time, but Pokemon's strengths have always been within its core gameplay loop, discovering new places in Pokemon and raising the most elite team possible. With how story and dialogue focused these newer games have gotten, I feel like they've lost something in terms of replayability. The quicker you can get me into that gameplay loop, the better. Opinions on Generation 1 Pokemon can vary wildly. They are the most iconic designs in the entire series, but they're also some of the most simplistic. Now that I understand the context behind the game's creation, I have a greater appreciation for them. Pokemon like Nidoran, Pidgey or Butterfree may seem simplistic, sure, but that's by design. They were meant to emulate the kind of things that Chijiri might have found in his childhood. I'll argue with anybody that says the design's peaked here. This one is literally just a Pokeball with eyes for fuck's sake. But like a lot of things in Gen 1, I think that there's a lot of charm in that simplicity. It also has my favourite Pokemon Gengar, equal parts goofy as he is badass. That being said, you might not be able to recognise hardly any of them because these sprites are... Whoa. Put it this way, if my child brought these home, they definitely would not be going on the fridge. Pidgey looks like he's remembering Vietnam, Wigglytuff looks like a psychotic killer, and Charizard looks like he was designed by a blind person. A few of them look decent. I actually kind of fuck with backwards coughing, I'm not gonna lie. But you want to know the funny thing? Is that these are actually the improved versions. Oh yes, they actually get worse. Venusaur looks like he's being impaled, Charizard somehow got even worse, and Ekans looks like an angry duck. You know, I think the pro-choice crowd is actually starting to win me over. Kanto is one of the more open regions in the series. Once you gain access to Cut from the SS Anne, you've basically got the entire map to explore. Certain paths and dungeons will require you to use HMs in order to progress. A different kind of collectible that you get throughout the game is HMs and TMs. TMs are one-use items that can teach your Pokemon moves. You get these from the overworld, in dungeons, or by beating gym leaders. HMs on the other hand can be used to clear roadblocks. They differ from TMs in that they can't be erased once taught, so choose very carefully, as far as I'm aware, this game does not have a move deleter. It's a bit annoying since you have to go into the menu every time you want to use one, but otherwise I adjusted fairly quickly. The towns aren't really anything to write home about, but I'm not going to knock the game too harshly for that since this is pretty standard for 8-bit RPGs. All of the buildings are basically identical. The only real way to distinguish one town from another is via layout and music. Not a bad position to be in for this game because Generation 1 has one of my favourite soundtracks in the whole series. Route 1, Cerulean City, Celadon, the gym battle theme, it all ranks extremely high for me. Junichi Masuda is responsible for the soundtrack, a man that would go on to direct Pokemon through its golden age, and somebody that still has heavy involvement in the series today. Dungeons in Gen 1 can actually be a bit tricky compared to other games in the series. They're by no means hard, but you do need to think a little more in regards to resource management. Pokemon only have a set number of uses for their moves. While it is possible to restore them via elixirs, they are incredibly rare items that can't be bought in stores. Additionally, they can be pretty hard to navigate your first time through. Shout out to that one panel in the Silphco building. You know the one. Rock Tunnel is a pretty infamous roadblock in Fire Red and Leaf Green. What you're supposed to do is catch at least 10 Pokemon and then get the Flash HM from Professor Oak's aid. Thing is, you can still see the outline of the room, so as long as you follow those, you should be fine. Another issue you may face is your bag. You can only carry up to 30 different items at a time, and unlike future games, they're all in one pocket. Certain dungeons will have you pick up key items in order to progress, so make sure you're keeping an eye on your inventory. You can always store what you don't need in the PC. Gym battles are your main objective. There are 8 in total, each specialising in one type. Beating them also allows certain HMs to function, effectively gatekeeping you from the tougher routes. Additionally, they also raised the cap on traded Pokemon. Traded Pokemon gain boosted EXP, however upon reaching a certain level threshold, they'll refuse to listen to their trainers, effectively stopping you from just trading in a level 100 and nuking the entire game. Before you get to the gym leader, sometimes you'll be required to do a challenge of some sort. Koga with his invisible walls, and more infamously Sabrina with her teleporting pads. Do you know what hell looks like? Because I do, and it's called Lieutenant Surge's Gym. I've had no problem with this puzzle in the past, but for whatever reason, I just could not get this second switch to appear. See, the second switch is always adjacent to where the first one was. What that means is that in most cases you've got a 25% chance of getting the right one. Fail and the door locks. I think the gym battles and by extension the Elite Four is what really lets the game down in terms of difficulty. Trainer battles, you expect them to be dumb, but the gym leaders are something else. Unless you pick Charmander, I fail to see how you can struggle with any of these. Have you seen some of these move pools? Sludge Bomb hasn't been introduced yet, so Koga is free. Erika is a grass type, so she's free. Sabrina's Alakazam doesn't know Psychic, only one of Lieutenant Surge's Pokemon knows Thunderbolt. Voltorb not having any electric moves at all. Oh, Blaine, what the hell did they do to you? Not a single flamethrower in sight, and Giovanni doesn't know Earthquake. But even if these movesets weren't as vapid as a high guard map, it still wouldn't make a difference because this AI is borderline mentally handicapped. Forget your jobs, this AI couldn't even take over a fucking McDonald's. Even in a situation where your back's against the wall, sometimes they just refuse to seize the kill. Yes, by all means use that tackle. I am not joking when I say some of the battles in this game left me legitimately speechless. While fighting, Blaine suddenly got a case of dementia because he decided to start using super potions on a Pokemon at full health. Twice. President Biden, it really is a tremendous honour. Giovanni used Dig with his Dugtrio and then while underground proceeded to power up with X items. The fuck? I didn't even know that was possible.
Is he in the fucking ground? He's cheating!
The saddest example I can give is in the champion battle against Blue. I start off by using Toxic, which inflicts worsening poison damage every turn. His Executor then proceeds to use Hypnosis. At this point you're probably thinking, well, you're fucked, he's going to use Psychic. No, mainly because he doesn't have it. He then proceeds to take so long killing me, he faints from the poison. All the while my Venusaur is still conked out. Yes, he literally beat him in his sleep. If this was Fire Red, or hell, even Let's Go, I would have never been able to get away with this. Look, I'm fully in agreement that the newer games are pretty brain dead, but after this playthrough, I don't want to hear any Gen 1 fanboys boasting. In terms of extra content, it's rather slim pickings. You've got the Pokédex, which gives you nothing except an enlarged ego, and a few extra dungeons. The legendary birds, for example, you can all catch pre-League. Moltres is literally chilling in Victory Road. Rather than throwing the ball and hoping for a successful capture, here it will just straight up miss the Pokemon. A successful throw resulting in a guaranteed catch. The game's only true post-game dungeon is the Cerulean Cave, housing the most powerful Pokemon in the entire game, Mewtwo. A Pokemon foreshadowed in the Cinnabar Mansion. A Pokemon born from the recently discovered Mew. Scientifically engineered to be the world's strongest Pokemon. Except he isn't, Rayquaza is cooler. I like Mewtwo, don't get me wrong, but unlike every other legendary, he's always been relegated to the post-game, so you never really have much of a chance to use him. It's the Saitama paradox. Yeah, you're the strongest, but that doesn't mean shit when the best you can be is pest control. But if this is Mewtwo, there must be a Mewtwo, right? Well, no. At least almost no. Programmer Shigeki Morimoto added Mew during the debugging phase literally days before the game was set to release in Japan. No one, not even those at Nintendo, knew of Mew's existence. Which, to me, is a stroke of genius and part of the reason why I think Pokemon took off the way it did. Mew is the first in what would come to be known as mythical Pokemon, which up until recently could only be obtained through in-store or online events. Pokémon Red and Blue came out at a time where the internet was developed enough to spread gossip, but not quite developed enough to rocket everything. Rumours and myths were everywhere in regards to this series, even as late as Gen 3. It's literally just a white rock, but you couldn't tell me that. And although it may seem daft now that Mew might be hidden in some kind of out-of-bounds truck, these rumours did have credence to them because there was already a precedent for this. Mew's existence signalled to people that even if you think you know everything there is to know about Pokemon, there's always more hidden in plain sight. It's one of the reasons why indulging in the expanded universe was so satisfying. But we are not done yet, we still have to talk about Pokemon Yellow, released internationally in 1999 to satisfy audiences still waiting for the release of Gold and Silver. Yellow is probably the weirdest mainline game out there because it's more of a lateral step rather than a true definitive edition. In fact, despite its many improvements, it's often ignored in favour of Red and Blue. The answer as to why is staring at you right in the face. Yes, Chonkachu got his very own game. Pokemon Yellow loosely emulates the anime where, much like Ash, you get a Pikachu. Now that doesn't seem like much of a problem, but it drastically reduces the game's replayability. As I said, the starter is the route that your entire team will grow from. By having that stay the same each time, you're funneled into similar team compositions. There's also the fact that this game really isn't designed for Pikachu to be a starter to begin with. He literally can't touch Brock, and no, before you say anything, you can't hit the sprinklers. To compensate, the Nidoran line has been given double kick way earlier than it did in Red and Blue. You can always catch a Mankey, but this isn't Gem 9 and Primeape sucks dick, so I wouldn't recommend it. Something I wish I knew before I dumped all that experience into it. You don't have to use either Pokemon throughout the game if you don't want to, but that's finite trainer experience that you're wasting. And don't think you can go about evolving this pudgy fuck either, because much like Ash, you can't. This particular Pikachu is the introduction of the following mechanic. It's limited to one Pokemon in this game, however Pikachu will react in different ways depending on the environment. The game's also in colour now, though it's one of those very limited Game Boy Color games that isn't really actually in full colour. It does help the towns feel a little bit more distinct at least, although I could have gone without burning my eye sockets in Cinnabar Mansion. The sprites are also much closer to what you'd expect them to look like, which on the one hand is great, but there was also something so charming about how catastrophically shit the old ones were. Are you really playing Gen 1 without these? The encounter list is more or less the same, a mix of both Red and Blue with a few deviations here and there. The biggest difference is that you can obtain all 3 starters. This is seriously cool, but it comes with a massive catch. They're only level 10, and to top that off, you get them all basically within walking distance of each other. If you can grind them up, they're a great asset to have, and I'm assuming that's what they want me to do since this is based off the anime. However, doing this also massively destroys the game's pacing, something I praised Red and Blue for. You could always just use one of them, but at that point, why don't you just play Red and Blue? The gym leaders are both harder and easier. It's weird because they try to remain faithful to the anime, so a lot of the teams were changed. To verify this, I decided to rewatch the whole of Indigo League, is what a better creator would say. Look, I may be autistic, but I'm not that autistic. Erika, for example, now has a Weeping Bell and Gloom instead of their evolved forms. Koga has 3 Venonats and a Venomoth, Sabrina has the entire Abra line, and hilariously, Lieutenant Surge has just a Raichu. To compensate for this, their levels are quite a bit higher and their movesets are a massive improvement across the board. Blaine actually has some decent firepower now. Giovanni actually uses ground type moves, and Sabrina's Alakazam knows Psychic, making her the hardest fight in the game. It's still Gen 1 AI, so it can be pretty dumb, but Yellow version is definitely the harder of the two. The only ones that are made easier are Erika and Koga, but it's also Erika and Koga, so it's not like you were losing to them anyway. Oh, and before I forget, Jesse and James are here. Isn't that lovely? The only other thing I have to talk about in regards to Yellow version is a mini game where Pikachu rides a surfboard. I believe you get this from transferring a surfing Pikachu from Pokemon Stadium. On the Virtual Console release, it's unlocked from the start. If I'm going back to Generation 1, it will most definitely be with Red and Blue. Yellow definitely has its charm for sure, and I think it's worth checking out if you've played the other 2 games to death. But the lack of a starter variable is what breaks this one for me. I'm not going to pretend like the Pikachu you get is completely dead weight, it definitely had its moments, but it was a struggle. On the whole though, I really like Gen 1. It's crusty in places, no doubt, and is held together about as well as a sexless marriage, but thanks to its solid foundation and no-nonsense progression, it's simple, intuitive, and fun. Even in the face of its remakes, I think if you're curious about how the series started, this is a fine game to go back to. I enjoy it a lot. It's honestly a great pick up and put down RPG. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you don't happen to see any of my non-Pokemon videos, I will see you all in Johto. Bye for now.